Hello and welcome to My Book, a podcast on books and their authors, produced by Cine Ink, based in London. I'm Loveleen Kacker. In this episode, I'm going to be in conversation with Ruchira Gupta, whose book, I Kick and I Fly, has very recently been released and is getting very positive views globally.
As an Indian, as a citizen of the world, I couldn't understand that how could something like this be happening in my lifetime, in my country. And I really was determined to do something because, these girls were no more than between 9 and 13 years old. And there were iron bars on the window and with people sitting at the door. As a journalist, I'd covered war, I'd covered famine, I'd covered hunger, conflict even. But I'd never seen this kind of violence done so intimately by one human being on another.
Ruchira is a journalist, an author, a professor in the New York University, and an activist who has founded the organization Apne Aap, which is working for the eradication of sex trafficking. Welcome to my book, Ruchira.
Thank you, Loveleen. It's indeed a pleasure to be on your podcast.
So, Ruchira, I would like to say that your book is getting rave reviews and honestly everywhere, whether it's on television, on radio, it's everywhere. From New York to India, it's everywhere, which is really wonderful. But what I would like to begin by talking is what brought this book. What I understand is you were a journalist and you were with the UN. Why sex trafficking?
It was an accident in my life. I was a journalist and I was walking through the hills of Nepal. And I came across rows of villages with missing girls. And of course, as a journalist, I had to find the answer. I asked the men who were sitting and drinking tea, playing cards, where the girls were. And they said the girls are in Mumbai. I followed the trail and found little girls locked up in small rooms for years. And I was upset, I was angry, but I was also determined to do something about it. And the first thing I did as a journalist was to tell the story. I made a documentary called The Selling of Innocence, and even now it's on my homepage on
Yes, I believe it got an Emmy.
That's how I won the Emmy, exactly. And when I was on stage in New York at the Broadway Marquis Hotel, everybody was clapping and I could see all the bright lights. But beyond the bright lights, I could see the eyes of the women who had told their stories in my documentary just because they wanted to save their daughters. And in that instant, Loveleen, I decided that I'm going to use my Emmy and my documentary not to build a career in journalism, but to make a difference.
That's amazing because I have been to many a red light area during some limited work which I did in the Ministry of Women and Child some years back.
That's when we met, do you remember?
We did. I used to be the Joint Secretary of the Ministry. And I have been to Sonagachi and there's no point in mentioning Bombay, all these areas. And in my experience, I have possibly never seen a more miserable and experience for anyone to have to undergo. So I totally understand that it must have been an enormous emotional wrench.
It really was because, as a woman, as an Indian, as a citizen of the world, I couldn't understand that how could something like this be happening in my lifetime, in my country. And I really was determined to do something because, these girls were no more than between 9 and 13 years old. And there were iron bars on the window and with people sitting at the door, 20 rooms.
Little holes in which
rats on the floor.
Yeah.
It was just... I as a journalist, I'd covered war, I'd covered famine, I'd covered hunger, conflict even. But I'd never seen this kind of violence done so intimately by one human being on another. So I told the story and I told you that, I had to do something about it. And then I didn't really know what to do because all I knew was journalism. But I took the documentary to the United Nations and showed it there and asked for a law which would protect the girls and women and punish the traffickers. Then I took the documentary to the US Congress and showed it there and testified, bearing witness to the crime of trafficking and saying we need a new definition and we have to stop blaming the women and girls, protect them, prevent their trafficking, and blame the traffickers and punish them. And today we have the UN Protocol to End Trafficking in Persons, and we have the US Trafficking Victim Protection Act, And I'm happy to report that I played a role in that.
No, that's wonderful. And
I think that's how we met, because
yes, exactly.
we were trying to
Yeah.
create a framework for India.
Absolutely. And I was just coming to that exactly. Though US response was enormous and very positive, and they did come out with all these conventions. But what about the laws in India? In India, I mean, at that time, I remember when we were working, we had this Immoral Traffic Prevention Act, which everybody knows. It's immoral. The immorality is all in the women, not in the men, which is the most surprising part of it.
Yeah, blame the victim. And
Yeah,
he
blame the
wanted to
victim.
shift the
Yeah.
blame from the victim to the perpetrator.
Yeah.
And it took 10 years after I did the UN protocol and the US law to get the law changed in India. And that too after that horrible bus rape of that girl who was a paramedical student, Jyoti Singh Pandey. And, then India suddenly woke up and thought we need stricter laws to punish sexual assault. And in that, I was able to put through a bill, a clause or a section saying that we also need to have a law which will punish sexual assault of women who are trafficked.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm saying there's the POSCO also, which is a fairly recent law. And then there's a Children's Commission, and I don't know whether I should be admitting it like here, but I was responsible for getting it passed through the parliament. But I really don't know whether it's an effective instrument that is able to help the children in any way.
See, every law and every commission is only as good as the people who run it. So if the people are idealistic, or if they are really interested in achieving the aims of the commission or the law, they can do it. But if they are not, then nothing will be done. For example, right now in India, children, especially the people I call the last girls, and the idea of the concept of the last girl I derived from Gandhi. Because he says that whenever he embarked on any action, he would think of the most vulnerable person he knew, and if that action had an impact on that person, he would undertake it.
Yeah.
So to me, that person is the 13-year-old in a brothel, and I call her the last girl because she's poor, she's female, she's a teenager.
Yeah.
And in India, of course, she's from an oppressed caste or from a minority group. In Europe, she could be a refugee or someone who's seeking asylum. In America, she's Native American or black, but she exists everywhere. And she's the one shivering on the sidewalk waiting for a customer or trapped in a brothel. And so I call her the last girl. And very often I've noticed that as countries decide to shift their priorities from, say, expense on people to expense on arms, then what also happens is that the budgets are cut for the last girls first. And which means that their basic needs, which are provided through a government system, which we call the welfare state. In America, we use the term entitlements, that these are the entitlements of every person who lives in this country, which is food, clothing, shelter, education, and child protection. Those are cut. And that's exactly what's happening in India now.
So, like we were also working at that time we were doing a process called child budgeting with another common friend that we have. And year on year, we found that child budgets barely moved a couple of point percentages up or below. But recently, these such budgets are going down further. So what kind of welfare are we talking about? Does it even exist?
That's the problem, and that's why, I wrote I Kick and I Fly, because it's a fiction, it's a novel about a young girl who escapes the sex trade with the help of Kung Fu. And it's based on a true story which I experienced in my NGO Apne Aap, where we ran a community center in a red light district in a small village in Bihar on the border of Nepal. Now this red light district is just a dirt street with mud huts on both sides. The front room is where the family lives and the back room is where the girls are prostituted. And they are brought into prostitution and sold into the sex trade when the cattle fair comes into town, right? And in that place is where I saw that hunger was an everyday affair. Yeah. It's not that the mother or the father want to sell the daughter. It's that they have nothing to eat, the roof is leaking, and organized crime in collusion very often with the local police runs that red light area. And this is in red light area after red light area in India and in the world. So in my book, I Kick and I Fly, I describe hunger a lot. And I talk about how Heera, who is my hero,
Yeah.
she's a 14-year-old nomadic girl, right? And her mother's breaking stones on the highway, and there is no food at home for her or her siblings. Her mother sometimes even scavenges along the railway tracks to pick up some food to just boil and give to the children. She goes to school, which is her only source of food. And when she's expelled from school, then she does not know where her next meal is coming from, and her days are numbered. And this is true, and this is what makes girls vulnerable to trafficking. So if we do not invest in the basic needs of the most marginalized girls, we are going to have more and more girls at risk to trafficking. We can talk about any amount of Beti Bachao, but unless we put money where our mouth
Mouths are,
is,
yeah.
nothing will change, and the problem will get exacerbated, right? And then we can go around changing them, data. We can camouflage things by changing definitions, say that we are the best in our demographics. Yes, the demographics in terms of girls being born has now become equal to boys. And that has taken years of efforts from the time when we used to work in the Planning Commission and talk about education and awareness and empowerment of mothers, to the point that we also had Janani Rojgar Suraksha Yojana, where a mother could go to a hospital and give birth to a child. So she was safer then, both the mother and the daughter who was born. Now we don't have those kind of things. Those budgets are cut, those programs are dismantled, etc. So I am quite worried. On the other hand, my book I Kick and I Fly is based on hope and triumph also, because when the system worked, it really worked. So we were able to turn the life cycle of a girl around by getting her into school, making sure the food was there. That became an incentive.
Yeah. No, excellent. I mean, I totally get what you're saying. What I really want to know is that I've been part of rescue efforts, not in Bihar, so I cannot talk specifically of the Bihar experience, but I've seen it in Andhra, which is another state where there are huge issues, and in Maharashtra. What we find is that legally you can take the Thana police along with you. But what all the NGOs complain is that the response from the system is next to nil. So you keep waiting, and what they do, as you said very rightly, they're in collusion with the traffickers. So very often they have already alerted the traffickers. And I have personally seen hidey holes, which are, I mean, as tiny as a 4 feet by 4 feet kind of a thing, in front of which there's a kind of a false wall created where these girls are hidden away. So what is your experience of how does the system, whether it's the state government or the local administration, do they respond? Do they really come up and support you in your effort to rescue?
Sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. It depends on, there are good cops as well as bad cops, right? And so if we can find some good people, we work with them and secretly run an operation and go get the girls out. And sometimes the cops are so corrupt that it's a well-known fact in the red light district. So we just avoid them and skirt the whole thing and go higher up or sideways or whatever. We never give up. And once we know there's a child somewhere, but there are these tunnels inside the red light districts among the brothels. There are secret rooms in the roof and below the floor where girls are trapped and kept ready for the customers. These are horrendous
things that happen, and unfortunately in this age and century in our country, where we are talking about enormous economic achievement and the world is saying, oh, India is the future of the world, and yet we find that things like women, anything related to women and children, just doesn't seem to get the priority or the attention that it should. What do you think about that?
You're right, because women are second-class citizens, and girl children are probably third-class citizens. And if you're a girl child from a minority community like a nomadic tribe or an oppressed caste, then you're a fourth-class citizen. So you really are, at the bottom of the totem pole. So if you're raped, fine. If you're kidnapped, fine. If you drop out of school, who's there going to come watch out for you, etc. So these are issues. And Loveleen, I live in New York now, and I advise the United Nations on issues related to sex trafficking, child protection. I teach at New York University courses on human trafficking. And everywhere across the world, I can report to you that women are second-class citizens. And if you belong to a minority group, then you're a third class citizen, right? So it is very, very common that I've noticed this. And to this idea of male entitlement to women's bodies, and that to dominate, to buy for, is so entrenched in the mindset of mainstream society that when I go around talking about the fact that prostitution is an absence of choice, it's not a
absolutely.
choice.
This is where this whole question of legalization of prostitution comes in. I mean, there are plenty of people who are beating the drum out there, saying that if you legalize prostitution, the problems will go away. The traffickers can be, and everyone gives the example of Amsterdam and all that.
Nobody is born and says, I'm going to grow up to be
Yeah,
a
to be a-
prostitute.
yeah, true, yeah.
Everybody falls into it as a survival strategy or because of some circumstances or force, right? And that's why I don't use the word prostitute. I use the word prostituted woman or prostituted child, because words have consequences. And I want people to imagine, the moment I say prostituted, they have to think for a second.
Yeah.
How? And the how...
So, I mean, it's not a voluntary act, which if some people need to understand. It's nothing, as you said, no girl will voluntarily choose to go into this.
Exactly. So even in Amsterdam now, I don't know if you know it, but the mayor is working very hard to close down the red
I'm
light
not
district.
surprised, because like pieces of meat in
Like
shop
fresh
windows.
meat.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
called fresh meat by the
Yeah.
traffickers.
Yeah, I'm
Naya
aware.
Mal in Bombay and fresh meat in Amsterdam and America.
Yeah. So, I mean, would you say that I'm told, maybe I'm not very correct here, that there is some real effort to sort of think that maybe this is the way out in India, the legalization?
So first of all, I want to break down for all our listeners that what does legalization mean? When we hear the word legalize the sex trade, what does it mean? Actually, it means legalizing pimping and brothel keeping.
And making it easy for the men.
So basically,
Making it easy for the men. The
they are
women are
saying-
suffering.
They are saying have licensed brothels. This was set up under the British colonial period also, where in red light districts in Calcutta, Bombay, across the Commonwealth, the British set up licensed brothels under two acts, the Contagious Disease Act and the Cantonment Act, to provide disease-free women
To the men.
to British soldiers and clerks who were in the service of the empire. So a brothel would get a license if they got their women checked up in the local municipal hospital. And if all the women were disease-free, license renewed. The license number was hung over the brothel under a red light. So Welcome House 67, Welcome House
That's how
53.
the term came in.
And so that's how girls began to be treated as factory products. And, that whole courtesan culture under feudalism, where women were commodified in a different way, changed to this kind of factory setting of brothels, where they were just every half an hour there was a new customer. When the AIDS pandemic hit the world, and many big foundations who develop programs top down without knowing the last girl that I talk about, designed programs to go distribute condoms inside red light areas by hiring pimps and brothel keepers as peer educators to distribute condoms. And they actually got journal articles written to say, if there's some exploitation or violence going on inside the brothel, ignore it, because our job is to get a condom out. And so what that program did was it protected male buyers from disease.
Of course, absolutely.
And it put women and girls, threw them under the bus.
Yeah.
So sex trafficking went up by 17 times in that 10-year period, entrenching the system, because suddenly it became okay to buy a girl if you put on a condom.
Yeah.
And that was it. There was no understanding of exploitation. And that's when the term sex worker became popular.
Which is a horrible term, if you ask me. I mean, honestly, I think that term itself has problems.
Of course it has problems, because it doesn't actually, what is at stake here is the definition of exploitation, right? So if you look at the term from the point of view of labor movements, and I'm a girl from Calcutta, so I understand labor movements very well. 4 things all labor movements aspire for. The first is minimum wages. In prostitution, actually what you earn goes down from every day you're in the job, because your body is getting consumed.
Because you're getting older. Maybe had a couple of children by then.
And your body is so consumed with the intimate contact that it begins to show on your face and your body very quickly. And also in India, girls are kept in bondage. So they are not allowed to keep any of the money. It's the pimp,
Yeah, they
it's
all
the brothel
take their
owner,
share.
brothel
Yeah.
manager, the cop, a
Yeah.
whole system who controls the girl. They all keep, and the girl gets deeper into debt. So there's no such thing as minimum
And
wages.
she can never get away.
And that's in India. In America, also there's a pimp, and he keeps the money. Then there are payoffs to the hotel, the lobby manager, to the cops, all of that. And so again, the girl gets a fraction of what we think she earns, and her earnings go down as the months progress, in any case, because they always want fresh looking girls. The second thing that labor movements want is working conditions. And in prostitution, you might put fans in the ceiling and give a clean toilet or whatever, and ventilation and light. But the one thing which cannot be legislated away in working condition, which makes it different from even sweatshop work, is body invasion. Because prostitution is based on body invasion. And COVID has taught us that anyone who even coughs near us, we feel scared. Imagine a girl who has like a fat man, a thin man, an unbathed man, all on her, come what may, because he's paid for it, and she can't say no. So that has both physical and mental health
and psychological
consequences,
issues,
which now research says that victims of prostitution suffer from higher rates of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, than even returning war veterans. So that also we can't guarantee working conditions. The third thing labor movements always aspire for is old age pension. In prostitution,
There's no
old age-
welfare system anywhere in
old
India.
old age pension, India kyun? America, US, my book begins in India and ends in
in the
America
US,
because
yeah.
it's a universal problem. And old age pension is disease and death in prostitution. With so much intimate contact with anybody, the girl is bound to get something or the other. And the fourth is that all labor movements aspire for dignity. Even miners, now we have laws which say they should not crawl into a mine, coal miners or diamond miners or whatever, they walk straight. But here the girl has to sexualize her personality, desexualize it. Her price changes all the time. It's negotiated right in front of her. There's no dignity. And this is something we have to understand when we say we want to call it work, because we are then actually accepting exploitation as work, and that means that the labor movement is retreating.
No,
And
that's true. There's none of it. But tell me, did that a movement which drew a lot of attention at that time, you called it "Cool Men Don't Buy Sex"? Did it work at all?
It worked. We got 18,000 signatures by young people across campuses in India.
Welcome back. I am in conversation with Ruchira Gupta, journalist, author, activist, painter, and a professor. But what Ruchira is best known for is her work in sex trafficking and the rescue and rehabilitation work that she has done, particularly in the state of Bihar in India. So Ruchira, in this book, I Kick and I Fly, I just wanted to say one thing as a fiction writer, that the best fiction is written when it emerges from something which we call quote-unquote aap beeti. And in your case, you've actually produced one of the most remarkable pieces of fiction which has come entirely out of a subject which nobody thought would be a bestseller.
Thank you for reminding me that it's come out of reality, because, I got so deep into Heera's story, and Heera's the 14-year-old girl I write about, that, I used to imagine, what is she going to do next when I went to sleep? And then I would wake up early in the morning and then start writing her story. And a lot of it came from true life experiences that I experienced through my NGO Apne Aap, and saw the struggles of the girls. So yeah, of course, all great literature is based on truth, but it's also based on hope. And Heera is about to be sold, but she's not sold. And she escapes because a woman's right advocate enrolls her in a Kung Fu program.
Right.
And through the practice of Kung Fu, Heera discovers the power of her body and learns to fight for it. And there's a quote in the book in which Heera says to somebody, she says, learning self-defense, I learned I have a self worth defending. So the aap beeti part is a little bit in Heera, but also in the woman's right advocate.
So kudos to Heera and kudos to you, because you've created a book where it is possible for a girl in such difficult circumstances to actually fight against it, come out of it, and get the support of the right people. So that, I think, is probably the real success on which the book hinges.
Absolutely. And it's also based on, again, in Apne Aap, my NGO, we 80% of our work is prevention and 20% is protection and prosecution, because we truly believe that if a girl is prevented from being trafficked, that's the best possible
Absolutely,
scenario.
no doubt about that.
And we run community classrooms inside red light districts. We get the girls into school. We hang on
The
to them.
mandalas that we...
The mandalas, which is
Yeah.
a Buddhist word, but
Yeah.
it means circle.
Yeah.
And our organizing principle is to form these mandalas of women.
Like women self-help groups, they all come together in support of each other.
Correct. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And then, we make sure they stay in school somehow or the other. And, again, I have to report that 20 years of running Apne Aap, now I can say that I've helped thousands of girls go through school, finish college, and get
That's excellent.
jobs.
Yeah.
And more than 20,000 women exit systems of prostitution. And these are only the numbers we've counted, because, we are an NGO, very resource strapped. We haven't even counted all the work that we did right in the beginning.
So, coming back now, would you say it's ultimately women themselves who came to the rescue of women, of girls? Are the men never going to do it? Is our work only going to be woman focused? What about the men? We've left them out entirely.
In my book, I Kick and I Fly, you will see that I have a lot of male allies in the book. There's a teacher called Sunil who helps the women's right advocate find a pathway for Heera to go back to school after she's expelled. He's also the one who pays special attention to Heera in school so she can do better in classes. He goes along with the women's right advocate to meet Heera's parents so that they can convince her to stay in school and finish her classes. So there are male allies. There's another male ally that Heera has. It's her brother Salman, who's a very kind boy. And when Heera wants to drop out of school and thinks that there's no point in studying, after all, she's going to be sold into the sex trade, that's the destiny of girls in her tribe. Salman is the one who says, no, you've got to stay on. And he encourages her and to find her own strength. And, at one point, Salman even says that he will drop out of school, though he's an ace student and wants to become a scientist. But he says, no, I will drop out of school and become a porter so that my sister can stay in school.
Yeah.
But we do the opposite. What we do is teach our boys not to have empathy, right? At 10 years old, it's the boys who stop reading fiction, and it's the girls who continue to read fiction. And fiction is such a great way to build empathy, right? So which is why, I've written I Kick and I Fly in the voice of a young girl. And my idea, because in the United States, this book was published by Scholastic. In the United Kingdom, it's being published by Rock the Boat, One World. And in India, by Harper Collins. Because I'm trying to reach as broad an audience as possible, including young people, 14 and up. Because I believe that if young people learn the power of empathy and they learn the power of standing up to injustice, then they will not only fight for themselves, but they will fight for each other, and we will have this world where no child is
Would you
bought or
like to
sold.
read a little bit from the book?
Bilkul, of course I would love to read from the book. Heera is already expelled from school, and her younger sister dies from cough that she caught when the roof leaked very badly, and the entire hut was flooded, and the girl had to just get no clothes, nothing, and the next day the cough wasn't cured because the mother had the money to take her to hospital for medicines, and everybody's feeling sad, and Heera feels there's no point going to school. She should become a member of a family which is sold into the sex trade to support the family, a resource in poverty. So this is where this chapter begins. After days of mourning, Mai, Heera's mother, returns to break stones on the highway. She says we can't afford another day of no wages. We have loans to pay and food to buy. I'm ordered to stay at the hut with Sanya, who is guggling and happy. Yet I can't help but feel entirely alone. I have one eye trained to look out towards my uncle's back room, one ear attuned to the noises. Finally, Meeradi comes by between clients. For once, she isn't drunk. She helps me make cow dung cakes to fuel our stove for the night. We pat them to dry in the sun, and the words begin to flow out of me. I tell her everything that's happened, about Manish and the school principal, about Reena Di and Kung Fu. It seems like a lifetime ago. She shakes her head in anger. Plop goes the cow dung patty as she throws it on the ground ferociously. I laugh and realize how long it's been since felt that particular urge. That's not Manish, Miradi, I say, still smiling. She turns to me with a conspiratorial smile. I know, Heera, but I just hate how they treat us. We are human. Our blood is the same color. We have the same 2 eyes, 2 ears, 1 nose, 2 legs, and hands. She does a little jig with her arms and legs to demonstrate. Our laughter helps to transform the feelings in the air. Miradi then ties her dupatta scarf behind her as she pulls out our little bamboo stool and comes to sit near me. Heera, now more than ever you need to go to school, she says with a shake of her head. I chew on my bottom lip, waiting for her to suggest something. Tomorrow, after your Mai and Baba are gone, go to the girls' hostel and meet Rinidhi. She sits there every afternoon. I will send her a message today. She will help get you back to school, I promise. What if something goes wrong like it always does? I ask. She gives my shoulders a shake. Do you want to end up like me? Don't you know my father is telling yours right now that this is the year to take you to the fair? Her arms drop to her sides. She knows she has said too much. I feel my hands go cold. This year? So it's true, even after... What? You think your sister dying will save you? It only makes matters worse. We are both sitting on the ground now, desolation hanging heavily between us. I think of what the women said when they came to pay their respects after the funeral of my little sister. They are older than me. Perhaps they know something I don't. I look out at the lane. An old man is sitting outside Jamila Bua's cafe, watching the news. The latest news on the TV screen, and she's put up for her customers. I wonder how he can hear anything over the noise. What if everyone in Girls Bazaar, Chacha and Baba are right? Did Chotu die because of me? What if I did bring bad luck to the family? I voice my doubts again. This grabs her attention. Since when did you begin to believe in this superstitious nonsense? I don't meet her eye, focusing instead on Jamila Bua as she fries the onion fritters for the lunchtime rush. A black crow drives a sparrow away from the garbage. It's a stark reminder that the mightiest will survive, that destiny decides who will be mighty. It's the way of the world, Miradi. If destiny hadn't decided where I was born, who has? It's all a birth lottery, I say bitterly, walking up and down inside the small space of our shack. She looks at me with no expression on her face. Then her brow furrows into a small fold. As far as I remember, you did fine in school. At least when you were a kid, you used to get the highest scores for reading aloud in both Hindi and English. You used to be so fond of books. I could not tear you away from the school library. She smiles at the memory. I smile back. I used to love the dusty library, the smell of books and the stories I read in the privacy of the desk between the shelves by the window. Tagore, Sharat Chandra, Mahadevi Verma, and the adventure stories by the English writers Enid Blyton and Laura Lee Hope. Words have always come easily to me. Then came the hunger, the bullying, the chores at home, my first menstruation. Everything slipped away. Do you think I remember anything? After the hell I've lived through these past years, there's an aggressive edge to Miradi's voice. I see that her small spark of hope is fighting the fear in her eyes. She wants to convince me to go to school against all the odds I must face. I look at her and remember her full-throated and happy laugh as a girl. I resolve to rekindle the laughter, light and hope in her eyes. I will overcome my fears for her. I will fight for my future, for the dreams that she could never make come true for herself. Outside the sky is grey, the sun sending out weak rays through the mist. Far off, a train whistle blows. I give Miradi's hand a squeeze. I promise I will go meet Rinidhi, I tell her. I want to anyway. Miradi finally smiles. She gets up to go. She can't stay too long in case Chacha or Shaukat start looking for her as soon as a new client appears. I will send Rinidhi word that you will go to her tomorrow, she says as she ties her scarf around her head. Her body language changes. She stiffens, drawing in her shoulders as she walks away. Selfishly, perhaps, I realize that I'm not just doing this for her. I want to be a person. I want to kick and fly. I want to win. I want to have the courage, like Rinidhi, to demand a life without fear.
Absolutely, that's well read and well said. Ultimately, we do know Heera, in her heart, is worried that poverty will compel her, and there's also a guilt as she talks about her brother and her younger sister and the funeral and all that kind of thing. So the question here is this: of course, the mother is very keen that to hold her back and support her and everything. But is this only poverty, or is it some kind of a tradition also that is going on in that area? Like a number of other malpractices that are happening. I'm again talking in the Indian context. There are a number of malpractices which we continue to justify in the name of tradition and ye hota hi chala aaya hai kind of thing. Do you want to blame it entirely on poverty, or do you think that if they had enough to eat, the father would not have done such a thing?
That's a very good question. So there is poverty on one hand, and then on the other hand, there is the demand for little girls, and the traffickers know that they can go into nomadic communities like Heera's to find these girls. The reason they can go and prey on nomadic communities is based on the history of British colonialism, because when the British came to India, they wanted to sell their own made in England products. And they outlawed many of these nomadic groups who lived in the forests from either making or trading in their products, which could be dairy products. So they wanted Caventers, the company, to replace. The engineering, if they made bamboo bridges or iron utensils, they wanted British firms to replace. Even to the point of the fact that they called what the indigenous medicine made by the nomadic groups from products from the forest, they call them, they banned them, and they call these people quacks. So when they were outlawed, these communities had no land to live on. They were kicked out of the forests, and they were not allowed to move from one place to another. In fact, the men in the community had to show up to the British authorities at midnight and at 4 in the morning to show that they were not moving. And if they were moving, they were jailed, and they were labeled as criminal tribes. And that's when the women in this community had to become sexually available for British soldiers and clerks, as well as for the authorities and for the landlords whose land they were living in.
No, I agree.
So tradition is something which can be created every few decades and hundreds of years. You know, tradition is never from time immemorial. So in Heera's tribe, the tradition of being prostituted and of pimping actually began not so far ago, about 150 years ago, in the late 19th century. To the point that now Heera's tribe believes that the destiny of girls in their tribe is to be sold into prostitution.
So I want to bring you back to this question, that unless the men are educated, unless the men are involved, unless the mothers of sons start teaching their boys differently, behavior will never really change, will it?
I think, we need to end this kind of role segregation between the sexes. So if more women became breadwinners and men became caregivers, then I think we would see role models differently. So children who are growing up would not resent their mothers as the first sign of female authority and then go on hating more women as they grow up. And they would see gentle men as their role models, and so want to become gentle themselves as they grow up. So I think the basic thing is, it's not the onus of mothers or of fathers, it's the onus of parents, right? Any parent or any person who's a caregiver in the life of a child. What kind of parenting or caregiving do we show to the child? And we have to show the child how to be gentle and empathetic, and also see people doing different things. Because normally what do we do to men? We say, oh, you're sissy if you're not the breadwinner. But what about if he wants to be a painter and be the cook in the house and let the woman do the breadwinning? So if we are accepting of that, we will be accepting of the other.
What now in your work, in the sense that what is the next thing that you do? Would you think about involving the young in the youth and the young in India? Because I do think the only way things will change back home is if the youth starts to think differently.
Yeah, so for me, the next is to broaden the movement, to recruit every teenager I can into my movement to create a world in which no child or woman is bought or sold. And for that, I put a pledge on my website, which I want every young person to sign. I've created resources for them to join the movement by sharing not just the book, but educational materials and awareness campaigns about how human trafficking happens, how can it be combated, and all of that. And I hope that in my lifetime, we can really, just like William Wilberforce did, he ended slavery, right? I think that we have shifted the paradigm from calling prostitution sex trafficking. In my lifetime, it'll become cool not to buy sex.
Not too bad. That would be marvelous. And on that positive note, Ruchira, I would like to thank you. You have been listening to a conversation with Ruchira Gupta, author of the book I Kick and I Fly. This book has been published in the US by Scholastic, in the UK by One World, Rock the Boat, and in India is being published by Harper Collins. Ruchira has made publishing history. I hope you enjoyed listening to this podcast. We would love to hear from you, and if you have any question or any feedback, please do write to us at post@cineinc.com. This podcast has been produced by Achla Sharma and Parvez Alam for Cine Ink. To listen to other episodes of my book, you can visit the Cine Ink website www.cineinc.com. Cine Ink podcasts are available on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and YouTube. Thank you for listening to this episode of my book. Until we meet again, this is Loveleen Kacker. Goodbye.